The Tsaloth were unlike any species the galaxy had ever seen. Towering figures, each standing over 10 feet tall, with skin as hard as obsidian and glowing eyes that pierced the darkness of space. Their technology was beyond the comprehension of most civilizations, with ships capable of vaporizing entire cities with a single shot. They had wiped out countless species across the galaxy, bringing entire planets under their rule through sheer force. To the Tsaloth, the galaxy was their playground, and every world they conquered added another jewel to their growing empire. Their supreme commander, Zothar, was a figure of legend. With a mind as sharp as the weapons he wielded, he had led the Tsaloth to victory after victory. He was ruthless, calculating, and absolutely certain of his species' superiority. The Tsaloth had long believed themselves to be the pinnacle of evolution. Their empire stretched across hundreds of star systems, and the thought that anything could threaten their dominance was laughable. They believed the galaxy's hierarchy was settled, with the Tsaloth at the top, an unchallenged ruler of all known life. The Tsaloth's understanding of power was simple force. They used fear, advanced weaponry, and overwhelming numbers to break resistance before it had a chance to form. Entire species had been wiped out without a second thought, their homes turned to ashes, their people enslaved or obliterated. The Tsaloth's sheer might was their identity. And yet, as they cast their eyes toward the stars, there was one small, seemingly insignificant system they had not yet turned their gaze toward. The Sol system, home to a primitive species known as humans. The Tsaloth had heard rumors of humanity's existence, but they paid little attention to them. The humans were no more than a curiosity, a fragile, undeveloped species fighting amongst themselves. They were not a threat, not even worth the time to conquer. Zothar dismissed the reports from his scouts as nothing more than irrelevant noise. Their greatest military minds were preoccupied with planning the next conquest, a lush world ripe for the taking, far more valuable than a speck of dust like Earth. And yet, something stirred in the deepest reaches of space, unnoticed by the Tsaloth. Unknown to them, a human signal had somehow pierced the vast distance of space. It was faint, but it carried an energy unlike any that Tsaloth had encountered. Their sensors were not tuned to it, their technology unable to comprehend it. It was a message, one that the Tsaloth would never have expected. The humans, for all their fragility and chaos, had unknowingly sent out a signal, a message to the stars, a signal that would soon stir something deep in the heart of the Tsaloth Empire. As Zothar sat in his grand war room aboard the flagship Vorith, contemplating the next steps in his empire's expansion, he couldn't have known that this small, unnoticed signal would soon be the catalyst for a challenge unlike anything that Tsaloth had ever faced. It would be a challenge that would shake the foundations of their entire belief system. The people of Earth had no idea that their signal had reached the cold void of space, carrying the faintest trace of humanity's existence across light years. The human race was entrenched in its own struggles, environmental crises, political divisions, and wars that seemed to never end. The Earth was a fractured planet, with nations vying for power, battling over resources, and struggling to keep their societies from collapsing under the weight of their own problems. Despite the chaos, however, there was something undeniable about humanity's resilience. The human spirit, ever adaptable and tenacious, was a force unlike any other. Though they were divided, there was an undeniable drive within them to survive, to overcome, and to innovate. But this inner strength went unnoticed by most of the galaxy, especially the Tsaloth, who dismissed Earth as nothing more than a primitive world caught in its own destructive cycle. The Tsaloth had long been aware of the existence of Earth, but had never thought it worth their time. They had far grander plans, far more valuable worlds to conquer. The human race was insignificant, a collection of squabbling tribes with no meaningful technology or military might. The thought of humanity being capable of anything more than self-destruction never crossed their minds. The Tsaloth believed that once they arrived, Earth's fate would be sealed within days, perhaps even hours. But fate had a different plan. The day the Tsaloth's advance fleet entered Earth's atmosphere, it was met with little fanfare. They had calculated the invasion to be quick and decisive. Earth's defenses, primitive as they were, stood no chance against their superior firepower. The Xoloth deployed their advanced warships, ships capable of disintegrating cities with a single blast, over Earth's most populous and resource-rich locations. At first, the humans were caught off guard. Governments scrambled to respond to the alien threat, mobilizing military forces in a futile attempt to defend their cities. The news spread quickly, with panic rising in every corner of the globe. People fled their homes in terror as the Xoloth unleashed their devastating technology, reducing entire urban centers to rubble. Yet, in the midst of the destruction, something began to change. Humanity, for all its flaws, was never one to yield easily. While some nations crumbled in fear, others rallied, organizing resistance groups and emergency coalitions. The sudden and unforeseen nature of the invasion jolted humans out of their complacency, and survival instincts kicked in. What the Xoloth failed to account for was the unbreakable will of humanity. A small group of human soldiers, stationed at a forgotten outpost in the mountains, made the first successful strike against the Xoloth. Using outdated, scavenged weapons, they managed to disable one of the smaller alien vessels. The victory was modest but symbolic. The Xoloth were not infallible. They had made the grave mistake of assuming humanity was weak. The humans, now awakened to the true nature of the threat, began to fight back. In hidden military bunkers across the globe, scientists and engineers worked tirelessly, reverse engineering what they could from the alien technology. While the Xoloth thought Earth's forces would crumble under their onslaught, they were unprepared for the rapid evolution of human ingenuity. The humans had begun to adapt. The Xoloth, meanwhile, still dismissed the human resistance as inconsequential. Their supreme commander, Zothar, remained confident in their overwhelming advantage. After all, how could a species so fragmented, so uncoordinated, ever hope to stand against the might of the Xoloth Empire? But in the coming days, as the human resistance continued to grow, Zothar's confidence would start to waver. The first battle had been won by humans, but this was only the beginning. The Xoloth had no idea how far the humans were willing to go, or just how much they were capable of when pushed to the edge. What seemed like an easy conquest was quickly spiraling into a war that would not only test the Xoloth's might but challenge their very belief in their superiority. The stage was set. The true battle for the future of the galaxy was about to begin, and humanity, for all its flaws, was not going to go down without a fight. The invasion of Earth had begun with the force of a thunderstorm, sudden, violent, and all-encompassing. The Xoloth warships descended upon Earth's major cities, their weapons cutting through skyscrapers and military defenses as if they were made of paper. The world watched in horror as entire capitals were obliterated in a matter of hours. Humanity, caught in the initial shock, scrambled to respond to the overwhelming might of the invaders. Nations were thrown into chaos, their governments in disarray, unsure how to fight an enemy who was seemingly invincible. Yet in the chaos, something remarkable began to happen. Amid the rubble and destruction, pockets of resistance started to form. The world's militaries, though disorganized and underprepared, began to show a level of resourcefulness that the Xoloth had grossly underestimated. In bunkers, underground shelters, and scattered hideouts, human leaders came together, sharing intelligence and rallying the remaining forces. They made their first attempt to strike back. A special forces unit, stationed on the outskirts of a decimated city, was the first to face the Xoloth directly. They were soldiers who had been trained for conventional warfare, accustomed to fighting human adversaries. But now, they were up against an enemy who wielded technology far beyond anything they had seen. The Xoloth soldiers, tall and imposing, moved with an almost terrifying fluidity, their energy weapons vaporizing anything in their path. The human unit, though outmatched, fought with a desperation born of survival. They knew their chances of success were slim, but the Xoloth had underestimated them. The humans had one crucial advantage that the Xoloth couldn't anticipate: the human ability to adapt. When a Xoloth ship landed nearby to reinforce the advancing troops, the human unit took their first gamble, an audacious plan that involved infiltrating the wreckage of a downed Xoloth fighter. With a combination of ingenuity and sheer determination, the soldiers managed to extract key components from the alien technology. They didn't know exactly how the weapons worked, but they were resourceful, and that was enough. They rigged the captured parts into makeshift explosives, then used them to ambush the Xoloth reinforcements. The result was shocking. A massive explosion sent shockwaves through the Xoloth ranks, taking down one of their heavy assault units. The humans didn't win the battle that day. But the message was clear. Humans were not as weak as the Xoloth believed. The Xoloth, still confident in their superiority, were initially dismissive of the attack. Zothar, watching from his command ship, dismissed the incident as a minor inconvenience, a fluke that wouldn't happen again. But he underestimated one key factor: humanity's stubbornness and their refusal to accept defeat. The first significant strike against the Xoloth was a warning shot, one that rippled across both Earth and the alien invaders. Back on Earth, news of the human victory spread like wildfire. What had been a momentary flicker of hope turned into a blazing fire of determination. While some still feared the alien threat, many now began to see the possibility of victory. The resistance grew, not just in numbers, but in strength. Ordinary civilians, once helpless in the face of destruction, began to organize, using whatever resources they could find. Everything from homemade weapons to old military equipment. They fought not because they were trained soldiers, but because their homes, their families, and their very survival depended on it. Zothar's forces, though still overwhelmingly superior, began to notice a shift. The humans, whom they had written off as primitive and weak, were proving more resilient than they ever imagined. Their guerrilla tactics, born out of necessity, were making a dent in the Xoloth's seemingly unshakable power. What had once been a simple invasion was now turning into a war of attrition. Despite the growing resistance, Zothar remained confident in his superiority. He would crush this rebellion, just as he had done with so many others across the galaxy. But for the first time, there was doubt in his mind. The humans were not giving up. They were evolving. The Xoloth, for all their might, had made a fatal error. They had underestimated humanity's ability to adapt. Now, the war had truly begun. The early days of the Xoloth invasion were marked by utter devastation. Entire cities were reduced to rubble, and humanity's leaders, struggling to organize a coherent defense, watched in helplessness as the alien juggernaut advanced. But as the weeks passed, a surprising shift began to occur. What the Xoloth had assumed would be a short, victorious campaign began to stretch into something else entirely. Despite the overwhelming force of their superior technology, the Xoloth found themselves facing an enemy that refused to buckle under pressure: humanity. As the war dragged on, it became clear that the Xoloth's initial strategy had been flawed. They had relied too heavily on their advanced weaponry and overconfidence, dismissing humanity as little more than a fleeting inconvenience. They failed to consider that humans, when backed into a corner, were capable of extraordinary things, no longer just passive victims. Earth's inhabitants had begun to fight back with a ferocity that caught the Xoloth off guard. One of the key turning points came when a group of underground human engineers and scientists, working in secret, managed to reverse engineer some of the Xoloth technology they had scavenged. While the humans were still far from mastering alien technology, they began to understand the basic principles behind it. They quickly realized that the Xoloth relied heavily on a centralized system to control their fleet, an Achilles heel waiting to be exploited. A brilliant human hacker, Maya Lai, became the spearhead of this new counteroffensive. Using the fragments of alien tech, she managed to breach a communication relay, scrambling the Xoloth signals and causing temporary chaos within their ranks. At first, it was a small victory, just enough to create confusion, but it was enough to plant a seed of doubt within the Xoloth leadership. Zothar, though still dismissive of humanity's capabilities, began to feel the first twinges of concern. He ordered a deeper investigation into the human resistance, but by then it was too late. The human response to the alien invasion was no longer just about brute force. It was about strategy, creativity, and the ability to adapt on the fly. The Xoloth were machines of war, but humans were thinkers, survivors, and fighters with a drive that defied understanding. Using guerrilla tactics learned from their own history of resistance movements, the humans began to coordinate hit-and-run strikes against the alien invaders. They no longer fought in traditional military formations. Instead, they moved like shadows, striking when the Xoloth least expected it, disappearing before the aliens could respond. Even civilians, once cowering in fear, found ways to assist the resistance, hiding soldiers, smuggling weapons, and sabotaging alien infrastructure. One particularly bold strike came when a group of human resistance fighters managed to infiltrate a Xoloth supply depot, planting explosives and taking out one of the alien warships. It wasn't a victory that would turn the tide of the war, but it was a message. The humans were learning, adapting, and growing stronger every day. And with each attack, the Xoloth grew more wary. But it wasn't just in their tactics that humanity excelled. The Xoloth, despite their overwhelming firepower, were slow to adapt. Their hierarchical structure, with Zothar at the helm, created an inflexibility that the humans exploited. While the Xoloth commanders relied on outdated strategies, humanity's response was dynamic and decentralized. There was no one leader to target, no central command to dismantle. Every human on Earth, from the civilian to the soldier, was fighting with the same goal: survival. Meanwhile, Earth's scientists, working in conjunction with alien defectors from previously conquered planets, began to develop their own countermeasures. Alien technology, once incomprehensible, was slowly being adapted for use in human weapons. Some of the technology was too advanced to understand completely, but humans used their creative ingenuity to reverse engineer it, creating new deadly tools for the war effort. As these innovations began to tip the scales in favor of the humans, the Xoloth commanders grew increasingly frustrated. They were no longer able to predict their enemies' movements, and their superior technology was beginning to lose its edge. For the first time since the invasion began, doubt crept into their ranks. How could a species that was so primitive, so fractured, be able to mount such a powerful resistance? They had assumed that humanity would fall, but instead, it was becoming increasingly clear that the war was far from over. Zothar, now on edge, ordered a complete reassessment of the situation. The humans, with their unpredictability and ingenuity, were no longer just an inconvenience. They were becoming a serious threat. It was a threat that Xoloth. The tide of the war was beginning to shift in ways that no one, least of all the Xoloth, could have anticipated. What had started as a brutal invasion, where Earth's defenders were expected to fall within days, had morphed into a long, drawn-out battle, one where the humans, though still outgunned, were slowly but surely finding their footing. The Xoloth, once confident in their superiority, were now on the defensive. Their once unstoppable war machines were being destroyed or crippled by a force that had no right to be standing against them. What had begun as small, isolated victories grew into larger, more coordinated strikes. The human resistance had managed to connect with other resistance cells around the globe, creating a vast network of fighters, engineers, and strategists working together to challenge the alien invaders. Zothar, the supreme commander of the Xoloth fleet, could no longer ignore the signs. His forces were stretched thin, and their ability to maintain control over Earth's key strategic points was beginning to falter. Even though they still held the majority of Earth's major cities, the growing resistance in the rural areas and mountains had begun to make it nearly impossible for the Xoloth to maintain their hold over the planet. The humans, once scattered and disorganized, were now a united front, together in a way that Zothar could not have predicted. The turning point came with a daring mission led by Mayalai, the human hacker who had caused the first significant disruption in the Solof's communications. With her new understanding of the alien technology, Maya and her team infiltrated one of the Solof's most heavily guarded installations, a command center located deep within the heart of a captured city. The goal was simple but ambitious: disable the central AI that coordinated the movements of the Soloth forces on Earth. For weeks, Maya's team had prepared for this moment, collecting intelligence, creating makeshift tools, and gathering as many resources as they could. The plan was risky, but if it succeeded, it could cripple the Soloth's ability to respond to human attacks. They would no longer be able to rely on their superior technology to crush the resistance. In essence, they would be fighting blind. The operation unfolded under the cover of night. Maya and her team breached the outer defenses of the Soloth base with a combination of stealth and sheer audacity. They moved quickly, relying on guerrilla tactics and their knowledge of the alien tech they had so painstakingly studied. Once inside the compound, they faced a new challenge. The Soloth AI was heavily protected, hidden deep within the heart of the facility, its core surrounded by layers of energy shields and advanced security systems. But Maya had one advantage that Soloth could never have accounted for: human perseverance. As the team fought their way toward the AI core, they faced increasing opposition from Soloth guards, whose brutal combat tactics and energy weapons were a lethal threat. Yet the humans pressed forward, never slowing, never faltering. The sight of their comrades falling only fueled their determination. Their mission had grown beyond just the need to survive. It had become a symbol of hope for humanity. After what felt like an eternity, Maya and her team finally reached the AI's central node. With a combination of hacking and explosive charges, they managed to breach the system. The resulting explosion was heard across the city, a deafening signal to the Soloth that something had gone terribly wrong. The AI, the heart of the Soloth's command network, was down. Chaos erupted among the Soloth ranks. Without their central command structure, their forces were suddenly disoriented. Ships lost their coordination, ground troops were left without orders, and communication between their fleets and reinforcements was severed. For the first time, the Soloth were caught completely off guard. Maya's team, though battered and bruised, had succeeded. Back at the Human Resistance's command center, the news spread like wildfire. The Soloth had been thrown into disarray, and the humans now had a window of opportunity. But there was no time to celebrate. The clock was ticking, and the humans had to act fast. This was their moment, their chance to turn the tide for good. With the Soloth in disarray, the Resistance launched a full-scale counterattack, targeting the alien warships and critical infrastructure. Zothar, now desperate, realized that the Human Resistance was no longer just a nuisance. It was a force to be reckoned with. His confidence had been shattered, and the realization that the war could still be lost began to settle in. The Soloth had long prided themselves on their invincibility, but for the first time, they were facing an enemy that could outthink them, outlast them, and above all, fight with an unbreakable will to survive. The humans had found their strength, and that Soloth now had to contend with a force they never imagined: the unyielding power of human ingenuity and the fierce drive to protect their world. The turning tide had arrived, and the war was far from over. Despite the success of the Human Resistance in crippling the Soloth command network, the aliens were not ready to give up. Zothar, though shaken by the loss of his command structure, had a final, desperate plan. The Soloth Empire was not just about overwhelming firepower. It was built on a culture of domination and fear. Zothar understood that the key to victory was not in technological superiority, but in psychological warfare. If they could crush humanity's morale, even the most advanced human tactics would crumble. In a ruthless move, the Soloth unleashed their most devastating weapon, a weapon not of firepower or alien technology, but of terror. They began targeting Earth's most vulnerable civilian populations, attacking cities that had already been devastated by the earlier stages of the invasion. The Xoloth used their highly advanced energy weapons to unleash targeted annihilation strikes, vaporizing entire neighborhoods and making a brutal public spectacle of their power. Zothar's message was clear. No matter how many victories the humans had won, their resistance was nothing compared to the Xoloth's ability to wipe them out completely. He sought to break their spirits and remind them of the true price of defiance. In the wake of the destruction, the Xoloth broadcast a chilling message across all channels, using Earth's own communication networks. Submit or perish. There is no other choice. For the humans, the toll of these attacks was devastating. Survivors were left in shock and despair as cities were reduced to ashes. The death toll mounted, and for a brief time, it seemed as though Zothar's psychological warfare was working. The human resistance, no matter how resilient, was beginning to feel the weight of the destruction around them. Many feared that the war was reaching its darkest point. Yet, amid the devastation, something extraordinary happened. A new kind of unity began to emerge. The horrors of the Xoloth attacks only strengthened humanity's resolve. The message of fear and despair from Zothar had the opposite effect. It galvanized the human will to fight back, not just for survival, but for the future of their species. Humanity had faced many crises before: wars, environmental collapse, and social strife, but never had they been pushed so far. They had nothing left to lose. The leaders of the global resistance, now better coordinated than ever, rallied the people. They broadcasted messages of hope and defiance, calling upon every able-bodied person to join the fight. Ordinary citizens, civilians who had once hidden in fear, now stood shoulder to shoulder with soldiers, engineers, and scientists. Together, they began to rebuild the military infrastructure, using the wreckage of the Xoloth invasion to create new weapons and defense systems. They no longer sought to hide or retreat, but to push forward and reclaim their planet. One of the key breakthroughs came from the research teams working on the Xoloth technology. In the wake of the attacks, they had managed to reverse engineer a piece of the alien weaponry, an energy shield system that could potentially turn the tide of battle. Though primitive compared to the Xoloth systems, it was enough to give humans a fighting chance. With the shield technology in hand, they began to fortify their positions, creating strongholds where they could launch counterattacks against the Xoloth. The human resolve was evident as they took to the battlefield once again. Each victory, no matter how small, was met with renewed determination. It was no longer just about survival. It was about proving to the galaxy that the Xoloth were not invincible, that humanity had the strength to defy them. Zothar, witnessing the resurgence of human spirit, began to realize that the battle was far from over. He had underestimated humanity's ability to endure and to fight with a passion that the Xoloth had never seen before. The humans' unwillingness to surrender, their unrelenting desire to protect their home, had sparked something that the Xoloth had never encountered: a true resistance, a force greater than their empire could have anticipated. As Earth's defenses strengthened, the Xoloth forces were forced to reassess their strategies. Their brutal tactics of terror had failed to break the humans. Instead, they had united them in ways that Zothar could not have predicted. The Xoloth, once supreme, now faced a challenge they were not prepared for: an enemy that could adapt, survive, and fight back with everything they had. The battle had entered a new phase, one where the fate of Earth and the entire galaxy hung in the balance. And for the first time, the Xoloth had to confront the reality that their victory was far from assured. The humans were not only fighting for their survival, they were fighting to show that, no matter how powerful an empire might be, there were forces in the universe far more powerful than fear. The spark of resistance had become a raging fire, and the Xoloth were starting to feel the heat. As the weeks wore on, the humans' counteroffensive gained momentum. What had started as isolated skirmishes and guerrilla tactics had evolved into a full-scale campaign against the Xoloth invaders. Earth's major cities, though still heavily damaged, became fortified strongholds where humanity's best and brightest worked tirelessly to develop new strategies, weaponry, and defense systems. And in every battle, humanity proved that it was far more than just an inconvenient adversary. It was a force that could no longer be ignored. Zothar, sitting in the command center of his flagship orbiting Earth, watched as the Tsaloth forces struggled to maintain their grip on the planet. The humans were adapting faster than anticipated, using their ingenuity to turn the tide. The alien invaders had never expected this kind of resilience. They had expected the humans to crumble under pressure, but instead they were rising up, stronger and more determined with each passing day. In one decisive moment, a coalition of human forces, military, civilian, and resistance groups, launched a bold assault on one of the Tsaloth's most vital assets, a massive energy generator located on the outskirts of a devastated city. This generator powered the Tsaloth's orbital weapons, a key part of their ability to target and destroy human strongholds from above. If the humans could destroy this energy source, they would severely limit the Tsaloth's ability to launch orbital strikes, making it much easier to push them back on the ground. Mayalai, now a legend among the resistance, led the operation. Armed with the knowledge of alien technology and the help of engineers who had reverse-engineered much of the Tsaloth's systems, she crafted a daring plan to infiltrate the generator's heavily guarded facility. The humans, now adept at using the Tsaloth's technology against them, disabled the perimeter security and silently infiltrated the compound. The assault wasn't without its casualties. The Tsaloth, though rattled, were still formidable, and their defenses were not easily bypassed. But the human forces, backed by their relentless drive to protect their home, fought with a fury and precision that caught the Tsaloth off guard. Every room cleared, every checkpoint secured, brought them closer to their goal. As Maya reached the central core of the generator, she knew this would be the moment that either led to their ultimate victory or their doom. The human forces had planted explosives around the core, designed to destabilize the entire energy facility. With only minutes to spare, Maya activated the detonators. The explosion was massive, a fiery burst that sent shockwaves through the facility. For a brief moment, everything seemed to pause. The Tsaloth had lost their critical advantage. In the skies above, the Tsaloth warships had been poised to launch another devastating strike on a human stronghold. But with their orbital weapons now crippled, they were forced to shift their focus to the ground war, leaving them vulnerable to a human counterattack. This was the opening the resistance had been waiting for. The human military, now fully coordinated and armed with alien technology, launched a series of coordinated strikes against the remaining Tsaloth positions. With the energy generator destroyed, the Tsaloth were forced to retreat from key locations they had once thought secure. Cities that had been lost were retaken, one by one. The humans were no longer fighting defensively. They were taking the fight directly to the Tsaloth. Zothar, witnessing the collapse of his carefully constructed plans, finally understood the true extent of humanity's potential. They were not just fighting for their survival, they were fighting for the very soul of their planet, and that made them an unshakable force. The Tsaloth might have had superior technology, but it was the human spirit that had turned the tide. The final push was now underway. The Tsaloth, no longer able to keep up with the rapid pace of human innovation and resistance, began to fracture. Their once unified command was falling apart. Zothar himself, while still a powerful leader, could feel the cracks in the Tsaloth Empire forming. His forces were losing ground, and morale was plummeting. But Zothar refused to admit defeat. He ordered his forces to make one last stand on the outskirts of the last remaining human stronghold. If they could crush the resistance here, perhaps they could salvage something from the wreckage of the invasion. The humans, however, were ready. What Zothar did not realize was that this final battle was not just about victory or defeat. It was about proving once and for all that the Tsaloth were not invincible. The human resistance, stronger than ever, prepared for the final confrontation, knowing that this was the moment that would determine the future of their world. The Tsaloth might have underestimated humanity once, but they would not make the same mistake again. The battle for Earth was reaching its climax, and both sides knew it was all or nothing. The final battle for Earth had begun. As the Tsalaf forces gathered for their last, desperate push, the human resistance prepared for what could be their final stand. The stakes were higher than ever, and every soldier, every civilian, every engineer had one singular goal in mind: to rid their planet of the alien invaders once and for all. Zothar, now a shell of the confident commander he once was, stood aboard his flagship, overseeing the last deployment of his forces. His empire, once vast and unshakable, was crumbling under the weight of its own arrogance. The humans had adapted, overcome, and fought with a tenacity that the Tsalaf had never experienced before. For the first time, Zothar began to doubt his empire's ability to win this war. Yet, he could not back down. He had to deliver a crushing blow, or his forces would be utterly destroyed. On the ground, the human resistance had gathered in force. Every corner of Earth that had once been a safe haven was now a battleground. Soldiers from all nations, survivors of bombed cities, and even those who had once been pacifists, now stood side by side. The network of resistance cells had come together, with civilians in support roles, acting as medics, intelligence gatherers, and supply runners. The whole of humanity had become one united force, determined to rid Earth of the alien scourge. Maya Lai, the hacker-turned-hero, stood at the forefront of the command center. The operation had reached its climax, and the next few hours would determine whether Earth would remain under the rule of the Tsalaf, or whether humanity would take back their world. "This is it," she said, her voice steady but filled with the weight of the moment. "We hold them here, or we lose everything." The human forces, now equipped with advanced alien technology, had a slight edge in terms of firepower. But it wasn't just the weapons that made the difference. It was the will to fight, to protect the future of their species, that gave humanity its true advantage. They fought not out of duty, but out of necessity. This was their home, their world, and they would stop at nothing to keep it. In the skies above, the final confrontation was already underway. The Tsalaf fleet, still formidable but battered from previous losses, descended upon Earth's atmosphere. They brought with them their heaviest warships and their most powerful weapons, intending to crush the human resistance in a single, overwhelming assault. The Tsalaf believed they could end this once and for all. But they were gravely mistaken. The humans, now fully united, had anticipated this. With the knowledge they had gained from studying Tsalaf technology, they had crafted a countermeasure. Armed with repurposed alien weapons, humanity's fleet was able to go toe-to-toe with the mighty Tsalaf warships. The skies over Earth became a chaotic battlefield, with flashes of light from energy blasts illuminating the darkening skies. Human warships, faster and more agile than their Tsalaf counterparts, darted in and out of battle, launching precise strikes that crippled the alien fleet. On the ground, the Tsalaf's elite soldiers, once invincible on Earth, were now being repelled by the coordinated resistance. The Tsalaf's technological edge was still present, but it no longer mattered. Humanity had learned how to fight them on their own terms. The alien invaders' advanced weaponry failed to account for the human ability to adapt, improvise, and overcome impossible odds. As the battle raged on, Maya and her team executed the final phase of their plan. Using a combination of hacked alien systems and their own technology, they launched an assault on the Tsalaf flagship. The ship, the command center of Zothar's forces, was the heart of the invasion. And if it fell, the Tsalaf would have no hope of regrouping. With precise calculations, Maya initiated a virus into the flagship's control systems, disabling its weapons and shields, and effectively paralyzing the ship. Zothar, watching the chaos unfold, realized too late that the humans had outsmarted him once again. His fleet, now without coordination, fell into disarray. Human forces closed in on the flagship, and it was clear that the battle was over. In the final moments, Zothar attempted a last-ditch effort to escape. His ship tried to break through Earth's atmosphere, retreating to regroup and plan another strike. But it was too late. Maya, seeing the opportunity, directed human forces to intercept. A final barrage of fire from human warships tore through the Salif flagship, sending it spiraling into Earth's atmosphere. The crash was monumental. The shockwaves rippled through the ground, but the Salif threat was over. Zothar's reign of terror was at an end. On the surface, humanity erupted in cheers. The impossible had been achieved. Earth had been saved. The last remnants of the Salif invaders were hunted down, and the alien empire's plans were shattered. What had seemed like an unwinnable war was now a victory. In the aftermath, as humans rebuilt their shattered cities and honored the fallen, they knew one thing for sure. They had proven to the galaxy that no force, no matter how powerful, could ever break their spirit. Humanity had shown that when pushed to the edge, they could rise up and fight, against all odds, and the universe would never forget it. The Earth was free once more.